We have a 2007 Audi A4 2.0 liter turbo FSI, and we're gonna show you how to replace the coolant thermostat. Okay, we're gonna start by removing the battery, disconnecting it basically, not removing it. Just remove the negative lead. Next thing, we're gonna remove the accessory belt. $17mm wrench, loosen up the tensioner, take the belt off. Remove the alternator, 6mm hex, there's 4 bolts. Loosen them up. You have to note one very important thing about the alternator. The two sides of the alternator are different. Some people twist it around when they put it back in, which will result in cracks on the alternator housing and damage to the alternator itself. Gotta show it to you in a second. Disconnect the alternator driver. You gotta press on the connector, pull on the tab, and slide the connector out. Pull the plug off the alternator power wire. It's a 13mm nut. Take it off. Make sure your alternator is disconnected, or your battery is disconnected when you're doing this, and you could pull the alternator out. See, this side of the alternator is bigger than this, so make sure you don't flip it around and put it in this way. You will go in, you will be able to connect it, but you will crack the alternator and it will definitely cause damage to it. I'm gonna take the charge hose off. Only one side, just put it to the side so it's not in the way. And here's the thermostat. Put our catch pan under the car so you don't spill coolant on the floor. It's very illegal to spill coolant on the floor. There's a clip on the lower radiator hose. Pry this clip out. Not all the way, you could leave it in there. Just release it. Yank on the hose. Make sure you don't break the hose while doing that. Yep. And set the hose aside. Now next, This hose goes in the top connection of the thermostat. We're gonna take this inner clamp out. Gonna slide it off the hose. It's easier to disconnect everything that's connected to the thermostat while the thermostat is still bolted down. So take it out. Do not pull on this pipe, it will not come out, it's still bolted. So we're gonna unbolt this pipe over here. It's bolted right above the oil cooler with a 5mm 12 point. Here. Then we have to release this ttip screw out of the thermostat housing to take the other pipe off. 5mm 12 point bolt on the other side of the oil cooler, holding this little pipe on the bottom. Make sure you put all these bolts back in or your coolant pipes will be leaking. Now you have play in both of the coolant lines that are connected to the thermostat. Take them both out. Make sure you're catching all the fluid that's going down on the floor. You could disconnect the wiring harness from the little bracket over here. Alright, and this is our thermostat. Now we have two 10mm bolts holding the thermostat down. For the lower thermostat bolt, it's more comfortable to use a 5mm hex key because of the angle at which the bolt is sitting in there. That's it. Our thermostat is free to come out. Just slide it out from the bottom. And you got it. Clean the sealing surfaces of the thermostat. Make sure there is no rust or any other debris where the O-ring goes into, or it will be leaking. There you go. We got our new thermostat ready to go in. Just lube the O-ring just a little bit with any bearing grease or anything like that, just to make sure it's not gonna get caught on the edges of the engine block and it's not gonna get damaged. So lube the O-ring, and now you could slide the thermostat back in. Be careful not to damage the thermostat O-ring on the way in. When putting it in, do not just tighten it down with the bolts. Press on it gently and twist it back and forth. Make sure it's sitting flush against the block before you put the bolts in. Now align the bolts and the bolt holes. Make sure it's still sitting flush. Now you could tighten the bolts. Alright, so thermostat is bolted down. This lower coolant pipe over here has an O-ring on it. Make sure to always lube the O-ring before inserting it into the thermostat. Make sure you check the condition of the O-ring. Well, O-ring looks good. If yours doesn't look that good, make sure to replace it. Insert the pipe into the thermostat and put the upper pipe onto the thermostat as well. Now we got these two 5mm 12-point bolts. One goes over here in the bracket, bolts those two pipes together. And we need to play around with the upper pipe to align it. The other bolt goes at the end of the oil cooler. And then we have a ttip bolt holding down that lower pipe to the thermostat. I wouldn't use power tools to tighten it, as if it's going into the thermostat housing, which is plastic. It's very easy to mess up the thread in there. So just hand tighten it. Put the clamp back onto the upper pipe. Make sure the pipe is in all the way. Make sure you put the clamp on in a position so it's easy to take it off next time if you need to, just in case. It's better if you don't need to. Clip the clip on the lower radiator hose back into the spot and loop the O-ring on the hose. Just loop the O-ring. The lower hose goes in only in one position. There's lining tabs on the sides of the outlet, so make sure it goes in all the way and clicks in. Try to pull it out just to make sure it's all the way in and it's clipped in. So our thermostat back in place. Now we could put the alternator back on. Make sure you remember the fact that one side of the alternator is bigger than the other. This is the outer side. I've seen people actually flip it around several times, and every time they did that, they needed a new alternator. Connect the driver right away. The power lead. Put the power wire cap back on. Align the alternator to the 4 holes. It's easier to slide the bolts into the alternator first. The top bolts, the bottom bolts go in no problem. But this top bolt is hitting the coolant hole, so it's easier to put the bolt in first and put it in with the alternator than trying to stick the bolt into the alternator when the hose is in the way. slide the charge hose out of the way. Now you can put the charge hose back on. Tighten the clamp. And now you can put the belt, accessory belt back on. Make sure it's still sitting in all the grooves and all the pulleys. If you took the belt off completely, you will probably need a belt diagram. If you don't remember how it went in, tighten up the accessory belt tensioner all the way. Slide the belt on the alternator pulley. And that's it, you're all set. You could pressurize the coolant system, put the coolant in, bleed the system, pressurize it, make sure it's not leaking, and you're all set. Connect the battery back up, tighten up the lead. Now we're gonna fill it up with coolant. The original coolant comes full strength. You could mix it 50-50 with water. There's a bleeder screw right on top of this coolant pipe that goes along with the intake manifold. There's supposed to be a little notch in it, but somebody already replaced the bolt with a notch with a regular bolt, so you gotta take it out completely. Don't lose this bolt. It has a sealing washer in it as well. There's a little copper washer on top of the bolt. Don't lose the washer as well. The coolant to start coming out of a bleeder hole without any big bubbles over there. And then close the hole. It will take around 2 gallons of coolant to fill up the system, as if you're using a full strength coolant. You could use a bottle of coolant and a bottle of water, so you will getting no bubbles out of it. So we're gonna close the hole, tighten it, start the car up, bring it to normal operating temperature, watch the coolant gauge. Keep it around 2000 RPMs for several minutes to make sure your heater is working properly, and you're all set.